Tired of restless nights? At Leesa, we know good sleep is essential for mental, physical, and emotional health. From memory foam mattresses to hybrids that keep you cool all night long, Leesa's mattresses offer exceptional comfort and support with free delivery and 100 nights to try out your mattress in the comfort of your home. For a limited time, save up to $700 off select mattresses plus 2 free pillows. Go to leesa.com/iHeart for an additional $50 off mattresses and select goods. Exclusions apply. See leesa.com for more details.
Brought to you by the first ever Toyota Grand Highlander. Hello, friends. Jack, Flight School O'Brien here, also known as Jack. Still can touch net if I get a running start and haven't eaten heavy breakfast. O'Brien, both nicknames that I go by. Inviting you to check out Miles and Jack Got Mad Boosties for a weekly basketball conversation with me and my co-host from the Daily Zeitgeist, Miles Gray. We are joined by comedians, writers, podcasters, and fellow NBA fans as we discuss the latest news and events from around the league. Check it out. Miles and Jack Got Mad Boosties. Brought to you by the first ever Toyota Grand Highlander.
It's time for a Big Blue Kickoff Live.
Nobody can ever tell you that you couldn't do it, because you did.
On Giants.com.
You know what I saw? New York Giant pride.
And the Giants mobile app.
17-14 is the final. One touchdown, we are world champions. Believe it, and it will happen.
Part of the Giants Podcast Network.
Let's go out there like a bunch of crazy dogs. Have some fun.
Welcome to Monday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live here on Giants.com as well as the mobile app. He's Matt Sitek. I'm Lance Meadow. First show that we are doing together. How special is this year as we enter Combine Week? It is presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants, in multiple ways. If you'd interact with us here on the program, you give us a ring, 201-939-4513. You can hit us up on Twitter as well, hashtag Giants Chat. And as a reminder, you can find the archive of this show and our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at giants.com/podcast. So it is Combine Week, Matt, and we figure we'll get into, there's some news about players that may be taking part, may not take part. Daniel Jeremiah just released his new top 50, so we'll talk about some of the changes, could very well impact where the Giants are at number 6, and one team has actually handed out the franchise tag. So let's start with big picture perspective, and the two of us wrote about this on Cover 4, the latest edition up on Giants.com, in terms of what to look for at the Combine. And I took more of a generic approach, Matt. I don't know if you delved into specific players and so forth, but my pinpoint was on the fact that it's about the chatter that arises from the Combine. You're going to have GMs, you're going to have team executives all in one place. There's going to be a lot of news that is going to be made public and also kept private that is going to set the groundwork for trades or free agency. And then, of course, the medicals. We're going to hear things about players, right, that nobody really had an idea about entering the offseason. So those, to me, are the two main ingredients that I think are going to come out of the next few days here.
Yeah, I mean, interviews, the prospect interviews at the Combine, probably the most important thing to take place in Indianapolis every single year. I mean, obviously the attention tends to go to the drills on the field, you know, the 40-yard dashes, the bench presses, all those things. But when it comes down to it, how these prospects perform when they're in these interviews with coaching staffs, front offices, that is the number one most important thing. And obviously that is something that we, the public, don't get access to that. We don't see what goes on behind the closed doors. But what happens there obviously has a big effect on what ends up happening 2 months from now at the draft. And the other thing you touched on, yes, this is a big week. All talent evaluators, a lot of head coaches are going to be in Indianapolis this week. You know, most NFL agents will be in Indianapolis this week.
Yeah.
The new league year doesn't start for another 2 weeks, or the tampering period doesn't open for another 2 weeks. But, you know, there's a good chance agents will start, you know, just putting some feelers out to teams in Indy this week. So those are two big things to look for. What I wrote in Cover 4 to look for in Indianapolis this week is the competition for the number 2 spot at 2 specific positions. So I focused on the quarterbacks and the wide receivers. Starting with the quarterbacks, you know, we're going to get into this a little bit later, but some of that, the draw of the competition for the number 2 quarterback spot lost a little bit of excitement when the report came out this week that Jaden Daniels would not be doing, on-field drills at the combine this week. He won't be throwing. The thing that I wanted to see was how he kind of compared to Drake May, the North Carolina quarterback, and see if one of them could kind of solidify themselves as the, no doubt about it, number 2 quarterback in the draft behind Caleb Williams. Not sure we're going to get that now since Daniels won't be on the field, but nonetheless, you never know. He could go into his, team meeting or interviews with the Commanders, with other teams, and knock it out of the park. And there could be reports coming out of Indy after this week that he impressed teams so much that, every team has him as the number 2 quarterback now. We'll see. And then the other position, the wide receiver position, I'm excited to see how Malik Neighbors at LSU and Rome Odunze both participate, or how they perform in the on-field drills in Indianapolis this week. Marvin Harrison Jr. seems to be pretty set and locked in as the number 1 receiver. I mean, maybe some teams have Neighbors above him, but consensus, Marvin Harrison is number 1. So now we'll see if Neighbors or Odunze can lock themselves into the number 2 receiver taken, which could be as high as pick number 4. If the New England decides to go Marvin Harrison at 3, that second receiver could go as high as number 4. Both of them could be there for the Giants at number 6. We'll see how the top 10 plays out, but those 2 positions in particular, I'm interested to see if one of those guys that's in competition for the number 2 spot can sort of lock themselves in with a standout performance this week.
Well, on a related note, we learned today Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, the 2 quarterbacks, will not throw at the combine. And then Marvin Harris Jr., who you brought up, he's not working out.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think Marvin has anything to gain, I guess I would say, at the combine. The quarterbacks, though, to your point, if you have a strong throwing performance, because remember, and this is why, Matt, a lot of quarterbacks don't want to throw at the combine. You don't have the luxury of throwing to your guys, okay?
Yep.
You're throwing to individuals that you have no chemistry with. So if it doesn't look as if the 2 of you are on the same page, you're worried, or at least the agents are, teams are going to judge them accordingly. So this is not new, what Williams and Daniels are doing, but I would say if you had a heart-to-heart conversation with the 2 of them, that's really the main rationale as to why most quarterbacks don't throw. However, they will throw at their pro days. Now, why will they throw at their pro days? Well, at the pro day, you bring your teammates along for the ride,
of course,
right? So you're throwing to guys that you worked with all season long, and the whole point is you want the optics to be fantastic, so teams really feel good about taking a chance with you. But I think most teams going in understand that with respect to these quarterbacks. So I don't know if that's going to downgrade anybody. I guess my point is, Matt, if they're not throwing, because it's routine for a lot of these teams to go through that. And then maybe, to your point, the quarterbacks will gain more by having the heart-to-heart conversations in the interviews. And they'll learn something about these guys from a personal standpoint, an intellectual standpoint that they couldn't see on film. So there is something for them to be gained. It won't be from an X's and O's standpoint over the next few days.
Yeah. And, in terms of the 2 quarterbacks, John and I mentioned this when I was on BBK last week. Caleb Williams, all but locked into the number 1 pick. There could be a debate, whether the Bears take it or whether they trade the pick to another team, but he seems to be, consensus, the number 1 pick. The second quarterback, though, there is a big debate between Jaden Daniels and Drake May. And one of the biggest things going for Jaden Daniels is his athleticism. I mean, he rushed for over 1,000 yards, double-digit touchdowns on the ground this past season at LSU. So John and I kind of touched on this last week that there might not be much for him to gain by doing anything on the field in Indianapolis this week, because he's already considered to be perhaps the best athlete at the quarterback position in this year's draft. All he could do was kind of go out there and, maybe underwhelm a little bit, which could only hurt his draft stock. So while this is news today that came out that Daniels won't be, throwing and doing the things at the combine, I can't say it's that much of a surprise. I personally would have loved to see him because he's just one of my, most intriguing prospects, I think, in this entire draft class. I think he has a very high ceiling, but it doesn't surprise me that he doesn't want to go out there and do these on-field drills, because all he could do, if his 40 time is slightly slower than what teams would expect, that could only hurt his draft stock. Right now, he is in the competition with Drake May to be the second quarterback taken. Nothing he was going to do at the combine was going to change that in terms of rising his stock on the field.
Now, we also learned Michael Penix Jr., Bo Nix, and J.J. McCarthy will throw. So they're taking the opposite perspective. And you could argue, well, given those three guys are not projected to go as high as the other guys, maybe they do have something to gain, especially if they impress once again with personnel they're not used to throwing with. So, because if you're a quarterback, you're not bringing your teammates with you to the NFL.
No.
So, if I'm an NFL team, I would argue you can learn, Matt, something about how they throw at the combine, because if you bring them in first day of spring workouts, they're not throwing to wide receivers. There is no established relationship whatsoever. And they're going to have to spend now the next few months building that. So if within the span of a few days, they can get on the same page with unfamiliar personnel, that to me stands out. So I can understand these three guys saying, okay, if we're not projected to go in the top 5, but if we can prove that we can make a quick transition, maybe, who knows, maybe they move up the ladder, whereas Williams and Daniels, and even May to a certain degree, they have more to lose, where I would argue these other three guys have more to gain in terms of at least the on-field workout component.
100% agree with you there. Especially, I feel like Bo Nix and Michael Penix. These are two guys that had a lot of success in college this past season, but they're still kind of fighting their way just to land in potentially in the first round of the draft. There are a lot of analysts out there that think that both of those guys could be second-round picks, day 2 picks. McCarthy, I feel like, is starting to separate himself a little bit in the fourth quarterback of the class debate. There seems to be a lot of reports out there that a lot of teams are more into McCarthy than the media might be, and that he could go, at least as of now, earlier than a lot of the fans and the public are expecting him to go. Now, he's definitely below the other three quarterbacks, but, Bucky Brooks today put out an article of the top 10 prospects who could rise in this whole pre-draft process, starting with This Week in Indy, and he did it by position, and the quarterback was J.J. McCarthy. If he goes out there, looks lights out in throwing this week, performs well in the other on-field drills at the combine, that we could be talking about him as first half of the first round, maybe even a top 10 pick in the next couple of weeks. He's got, I feel like McCarthy in particular, the opposite of Jaden Daniels, has the most to gain by going out and crushing it this week in Indianapolis.
Listen, Trey Lance, if you remember, when the Niners moved up to get him, that year, Trey wasn't necessarily the top guy on the list, or at least the guy that was projected to automatically go number 2. And over the course of workouts, conversations, things change. Now, speaking of the rankings, that brings us, Daniel Jeremiah just put out his new top 50. This is 2.0. This was released this morning. So I just want to read through at least the first few names. Caleb Williams is 1, Marvin Harris Jr. is 2, Rome Odunze is 3, then Malik Neighbors is 4. So that means that, which is interesting, Matt, he has 3 wide receivers in his top 4 players before we even get to number 5, who is Drake May, Jaden Daniels 6, Brock Bowers 7. Okay, so there's our first tight end. And then he goes corner with Terrion Arnold 8, and then Joe Alt at 9 before Fuaga at 10. So wide receivers is the most popular position in the top 10 as opposed to quarterback. Which, now remember, he's not going in order of where he thinks they're getting drafted. He's evaluating them as overall athletes and talent. But I think it goes to show you where the depth is perhaps atop the talent pool in this draft. According to DJ, and we've talked about this on previous programs, wide receiver has a lot of substance, especially if you're looking for, forget even classifying them, Matt, as a wide receiver. If you're looking for a weapon, somebody to change your offense, you could get that done with one of these names.
Yeah, I feel like over the last month, Jeremiah has been probably the most outspoken of all of the top draft analysts in the NFL media landscape, in that he believes that the top 3 prospects, period, in this year's draft are those 3 wide receivers. I know he has Caleb Williams 1, and again, that's because there's some people out there that think Caleb Williams could be, has the ceiling to be the next Patrick Mahomes. So I understand him having won in these rankings, but he's been very outspoken even in his pre-combine conference call last week with the media. He said that he believes the 3 wide receivers could quite possibly be the best 3 players in the draft. He has also been, I feel like a lot of rankings with the 2nd and 3rd wide receivers, a lot of rankings have Neighbors right behind Marvin Harrison and then Odunze number 3. He obviously has Odunze and Neighbors flipped. He has been, I feel like, the biggest proponent and the biggest, I don't want to say cheerleader, but the biggest fan of Odunze as possibly even up there with Marvin Harrison, like at that same level of wide receiver. So that is just an interesting fact that he has Odunze 3 and Neighbors 4, since a lot of people think that those 2 players in particular could be, the 2 guys at the very top of the Giants draft board with the number 6 pick in the draft.
Now, just for clarification, man, and maybe you know the answer to this, when he has 3 and then an arrow up, does that mean Neighbors jumped 3 spots or jumped from the previous position of 3?
Yeah, so that means, by that? So that means in the first edition of Jeremiah's top 50, Neighbors was number 7.
Okay, so he moved up 3 spots. Well, the reason why I wanted to clarify that, so just so our audience understands, so Neighbors made the jump of 3 spots. Drake May moved down a spot. Daniels also moved down 1 spot. Bowers moved up 1. Arnold moved down 2. Alt stayed where he was. Fuaga moved 1 up. So there was a little bit of movement, is the point, with his 1.0 to his 2.0 with respect to his top 10 rankings. And something tells me we're going to see 5.0, which is going to look very different from where he has the guys 2.0. But it seems like, barring a major injury or setback, I would be startled if he drastically starts singing a different tune with respect to the wide receivers.
Yeah.
I could see, Matt, maybe he makes a jump with a quarterback, offensive lineman, but I would think the wide receivers, given how high he has them and the jump that even a guy like Neighbors made, we would assume they're going to stay in the top 5 from here to when they're going to hear their names called in the first round.
Yeah, I would be shocked if that ends up not being the case. I think the only chance of that happens maybe if one of the guys suffers an injury in the next 2 months, or if one of them just goes out this week and absolutely bombs at the combine. It's a lot slower, not as high of a vertical jump, broad jump. None of those things are expected. Obviously, they could happen, but yeah, I would be very shocked if all 3 of those receivers don't finish in the top 5 of his top 50 prospect rankings. I do think there is a chance that we could see another wide receiver that's currently further down the board make a big jump over the next 2 months. I mean, outside of those 3, the next top receiver is Brian Thomas, who Malik Neighbors' teammate at LSU, who's number 16. He dropped 1 spot from the first edition of the top 50 rankings. He was 15 last time. Maybe he could, if he has an absolute amazing performance in Indianapolis this week, maybe he could jump up to borderline top 10. I don't see any of the other receiving prospects making as big of a jump. I don't even know if Brian Thomas will be able to do it, but Brian Thomas did have an amazing season at LSU this past year, is very athletic. There is a chance. We've seen crazier things happen in the pre-draft process.
Yeah. Well, wouldn't this be something if the team that drafts Jaden Daniels, I don't think anyone's in position, maybe currently situated, but makes a move up the board to take his teammate or one of his teammates.
Yes.
So that the 2 of them continue to play with one another. I mean, we've seen crazier things happen.
Yeah.
So there's an example where maybe Thomas moves up because a team says, well, let's pair our quarterback with a guy that he already has some familiarity with.
Yeah, no, that is definitely possible. I mean, especially if, again, Thomas is at number 16 right now. If he ends up starting to slide past that come the start of the first round, I could definitely see a team that, maybe has a second first round pick later in the draft, or even a team that's picking the second round that wants to get the receiver and get him with the 5th-year option, move back into the first round to pair Thomas with Daniels. I could definitely see that happening. Now,
just applying DJ's logic here in terms of his top 50, the more and more you look atop the draft, and hey, maybe the Commanders and the Patriots are saying to themselves, if we give our current quarterbacks weaponry, we'll be in better shape. But given, Matt, Washington has a new GM, okay, and Adam Peters. So he's got no ties to Sam Howell. And we've seen this time and time again. New GM comes in. Yes, some of them inherit. But when they have a shot to take their guy, more often than not, they take their guy. New England, okay? Belichick's not there anymore. So even though Gerard Mayo was in-house, you're going to have a new voice in the front office. So New England is easily in a position to say, we want to bring in our own guy. I guess my point is, I'd be very surprised, given the change with coaching and front office, if those teams pass up on an opportunity to go after a quarterback. The only thing to me that changes is if one of those two teams trades for Justin Fields, which could happen. If they trade for Justin Fields, because we're under the assumption the Bears take Caleb Williams, as you mentioned, then Washington, New England's going to take a weapon to pair them with Justin Fields. If they don't acquire Justin Fields, once again, I'd be very surprised if they don't go quarterback. That's why, to me, the wide receiver movement starts with Arizona at 4.
Yes, I actually touched on this very briefly in last week's Fact or Fiction up on Giants.com, in that I believe that the prompt was, will the top first 3 picks be quarterbacks? And
sure.
I said that I thought the only way the top 3 picks would not be quarterbacks is if, exactly what you just said, if the Patriots trade probably their second-round pick to the Bears for Justin Fields. Then, and then pick Marvin Harrison at number 3. However, I do just want to say that I spent a lot of time on NFL Twitter for Giants.com, and
which is always dangerous, but yes.
And there are a lot of reports out there that say the Patriots could not go quarterback at number 3. As surprising as that might be,
yeah.
And even though Jared Mayo all but said in an interview last month that they're going to be taking a quarterback, there are reports out there saying that there are people within the front office in New England that think they might be better suited either trading down or picking Marvin Harrison, building out the rest of the roster, and for now signing a bridge gap quarterback in free agency, and then try to figure out the quarterback situation in the draft next year. Personally, I'm with you. I don't think they're going to pass on a chance to take Jaden Daniels or Drake May, but there are some people out there that believe there is a chance. But even if that does happen, I think that New England would then just auction the pick off to whoever's willing to trade up to get that third quarterback. I would be very surprised 2 months out if the first 3 picks are not all quarterbacks, which, as you said, would then start a wide receiver run at number 4. I mean, the Cardinals, I feel like, are heavy favorites to take a wide receiver, whether it's Marvin Harrison or one of the other two. Chargers are a bit of a wild card. Some people think with the new head coach who loves running the football, stopping the run, that he could try to build in the trenches and go offensive line at number 5. There are people that think the Chargers could take Brock Bowers at 5, and then there are others that think they could take Neighbors or Odunze. So,
well, remember, they've had injuries, Matt, at wide receiver. Keenan Allen's not getting any younger, and who knows, maybe they move on from him. Mike Williams has been hurt. I mean, there's ample room for them to take a wide receiver. They're far from a lock in terms of their receiving core.
For sure, but then you have to keep in mind they would be going wide receiver in the first round of the draft 2 years in a row. I feel like we don't see it too often.
Just ask the Detroit Lions. Remember when the Lions took all those wide receivers? So it's been done before. And it's a new coach and a new GM. Remember.
Very true.
The guys that drafted last year, Tom Telesco, is not there anymore. So I think you got to take that into consideration. If it was the same GM and coach, Matt, I'm with you. I don't know about that. The fact that it's new, I don't think it'd be that surprising if they went the same position.
I do agree with you there. And Keenan Allen, I believe, is he a free agent?
He may be. Let me look that up. I know that there's been a lot of talk about perhaps they could go their separate ways.
Yeah, and I've seen the same about Mike Williams, who is coming off a torn ACL last year.
Correct.
So you're right. They very much could be in the need for wide receivers, and you don't get many chances to add a game changer like Neighbors or Odunze with, on a rookie contract like that. Those opportunities don't come very often. So point being in all of this is that when the Giants are up at 6, even if they have the top 3 receivers on as like the top 3 guys on the draft board, come April 25th and the 6th when they're on the clock, there could only be one of those guys left. And there is a possibility if those 3 wide receivers go 3, 4, 5, that all 3 of them are gone, which obviously would then mean that one of the top 3 quarterbacks are on the board. I don't think that, a front office would hate that possibility, but nonetheless, I expect at least one of those wide receivers, if not both of them, to be there at number 6.
Keenan Allen scheduled to be a free agent next year. So he's got 1 year left on his contract, but they could very well still part ways with him, depending on cap space and what they need to do.
Because they are one of the teams, I think they are like the most over the cap space of any team right now.
Yeah, well, remember, Austin Eckler is a free agent.
Yep.
So there's speculation about, maybe they don't bring him back. And, I don't think that's going to ignite them drafting a running back in the first round, but they could very well go after a running back in the later rounds to ultimately replace Austin Eckler. So, hey, with Harbaugh now the head coach, Greg Roman the OC, they could completely go in a different direction with respect to their offensive personnel. So you got to anticipate that. That's why I think all options are feasible, whether it be a tight end or wide receiver. Clearly they got Herbert. So it'd be stunning for them to take quarterback, but anyone around Herbert is in play for the Chargers.
Yeah, just last week, Greg Roman had a quote saying, can you imagine Justin Herbert with a good run game? Which, to me, that has me thinking that they might be leaning towards offensive line in number 5.
Yeah.
They have Rashawn Slater. If you go out and get Joe Alt, then you have what should be 2 great tackles, both on their rookie contracts. That is a very, very good way to build your offensive line. But yeah, a lot's going to change over the next 2 months. What the Chargers do in free agency will obviously play a very, very big part in what direction they go with the number 5 pick. But again, they are one of the teams that are the most over the cap. So they're going to have to make some moves, whether it's cutting guys, restructuring, just to get under the salary cap in order to make any moves during this upcoming free agency and to fit the draft class in.
Yeah, well, and that's why salary cap space is always fluid. We talk about it. Right now, it can look like it's in dire straits, and then tomorrow, all of a sudden, they're $5 million with cap space. So you can only read so much into that, but I'm with you. The Chargers right now are in a tough spot. They're going to have to do some cleaning. All right, we're going to open up the phone lines as we move forward here on Monday's edition of BBKL. Few reminders, Giants Huddle Podcast. You can check that out. Favorite podcast platform, you go to giants.com/podcasts. Giants fans, you can take your fandom to the next level with a season ticket membership. Stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days. Memberships now available for the 2024 season. To learn more about all the exclusive member benefits, visit giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available. And the Giants official connected TV streaming app, Giants TV. It brings you original video content and game highlights on demand and direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV, it's free. It's on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and the Giants mobile app. All right, let's head to the phone lines. We check in with Cliff in New York. Cliff, what's happening? What do you got for us?
Hey, guys. Thanks for the show. I've got a question first. We have this list of pending free agents, and my question is, can Joe Shane trade any of those guys if he wants to?
No.
Yeah, the
only situation I believe that he could trade any of those guys is if it's a franchise tag and trade, which I guess, there's a maybe Saquon Barkley, Xavier McKinney, but I would say very unlikely that happens. So most likely, no, none of those guys can get traded.
Okay. Because last week I learned to remember rules and regulations about all kinds of things, the way players are controlled and not controlled. I just had a thought about quarterbacks. I want to pick up also on what my thinking about trading down. Looking at what happened with Baker Mayfield, when the Buccaneers decided to take a chance on him, I think it was at a very low price, but still, they had a long, run of NFL tape to look at with Baker Mayfield and had a thorough understanding of what he could do in the league. And the same thing applies to a lesser extent with the guy from Chicago who everybody thinks is going to be moved. Is it Justin Fields?
Yeah, Justin Fields.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of tape on him, and people have ideas about what he can do and not do in the NFL. And none of that applies to any of the quarterbacks in this draft. So I'm just wondering if maybe the best strategy for the successor to Daniel, if there has to be one, which there very well might be, is to wait until somebody is with another team shows what they can do, and we'd be in a position to compete to get their second contract in the league. Because by that time we'd have enough cap space to spend the big number. You know where I'm coming from with this?
Well, but at the same time, the Packers drafted Jordan Love. He didn't play at all other than one game against Kansas City and had a really nice rookie year when he took over for Aaron Rodgers. So you've seen examples where you could draft a quarterback, he could sit for a year or two and then be ready to take over. I think there's good examples on both sides of the equation. And Baker, to me, it wasn't the fact that Baker couldn't play. Baker didn't have a stabilized environment in the other places that he went around. The reason why Baker flourished this year is Dave Canales turned out to be a really good play caller, and Baker had weaponry. I mean, Mike Evans had a nice bounce-back season. They had Chris Godwin. I mean, there's a lot of good talent around Baker in Tampa Bay. So that is just as critical to make the quarterback as opposed to just the quarterback and what his individual skill set is.
Right, and that's where I expect us to be much better than we are now in a year or two. I expect us to be like that, to have a better environment to offer somebody than they have now.
Well, but what I'm saying is you could draft a quarterback and still offer that environment to the young quarterback, though, based on your thinking.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Do you think that works as well in New York? I mean, the clamor would be extreme to put him on the field immediately.
Well, I'm not talking about the way that I'm reading your interpretation is if you were to draft a quarterback and not put him on the field for another year or two, you could build up the environment around him. That's what I thought you were selling, based on what you're talking about.
I'm selling mainly the idea that the best shot for getting a quarterback is somebody who's already played in the league, at least a year or two. And that you know a lot more about them that way than you would about any college quarterback coming out.
Well, I mean, from the Giants' perspective, and Cliff, appreciate the phone call. Thanks for giving us a ring. And Matt, we've talked a lot about this in various different shows. The Giants have to bring in a quarterback, whether it's through the draft or free agency. So if you use the thinking of the last caller, could the Giants go after an established pro to back up Daniel Jones? Absolutely. I think there's room for that, whether it's Tyrod Taylor, whether it's Jacoby Brissett. So, they could be in the market for somebody like that, but they're not necessarily in the market to bring in that quarterback and have him start immediately. A little bit different. Tampa Bay was in a position, the Bucs needed a starter. Tom Brady retired. Yep. Somebody had to come in and be the guy day one. The Giants are not in that position because of the existence of Daniel Jones, but they are in a position where they need an insurance policy and somebody in place. God forbid, A, Daniel's not ready to go at the beginning of the season, or B, he unfortunately gets hurt again, given his track record.
Yeah, I mean, when Joe Schoen spoke to the media at his end-of-season press conference, he said, we will be adding at least a quarterback to the room this offseason. And he said it could be through free agency, it could be through the draft. You didn't know yet. Honestly, I think there is a chance that they could sign a veteran in free agency in a few weeks and then still draft a quarterback. It may not be in the first round. It could be day two, but I think that is fully in play. Right now, the only quarterback that is healthy on the roster is Tommy DeVito, the only one. Obviously, there's hope that Daniel Jones will be ready by week one, but honestly, I believe it's 4 months out from surgery. It's still too early to tell. No one knows. Daniel, Joe Schoen, no one has any idea at this moment if he's going to be ready for week one. And they have to have probably more than one insurance plans in case that situation arises where Daniel Jones is not ready. So I fully believe they will be signing a vet. I believe they think we'll sign a veteran in free agency next month. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be one of the top quarterbacks out there. Could be someone closer for the minimum. That I don't know, but I do expect some veteran presence in the room. And then in terms of the draft, it's too early to tell. I think if a situation arises where they could potentially add one of the top 3 quarterbacks and it won't cost either too much to move up, maybe they won't even have to move up at all, I think that would be something that the front office would be at least interested in and would consider. But yeah, the quarterback room is going to look very different. There are going to be one, if not two, new pieces in there, and my personal opinion, it could be a veteran and a rookie.
Yeah,
come to start a training camp.
Well, I think that would be a sensible move to cover your bases, but I think what makes the conversation even more interesting, Matt, is the Giants and most teams have been keeping 2 quarterbacks on the 53. Okay, so let's go down the hypothetical road here. Okay, they sign a veteran in free agency because free agency is before the draft. Okay, of
course.
So let's say they re-sign Tyrod Taylor, they add Jacoby Brissett, Mitchell Trubisky. Okay, because I think all of those are feasible names based on the finances. Then the draft comes around, and maybe things bounce their way. They like a quarterback at 6. They take a quarterback. Well, you could argue, Tommy DeVito's status, you don't know now, because now you add Tommy in, now there's 4 quarterbacks on the roster. But then it becomes interesting. You draft a quarterback at 6, he's on the 53, okay?
Yeah.
There's no ands, ifs, or buts. Do you keep that veteran around in camp so that the rookie has somebody to compete with? I think there's value in that. And then maybe you cut him down as you finalize the 53. If you're fortunate, maybe you put him on the practice squad. But something tells me, Matt, a veteran like that, there's going to be other teams that are going to need insurance. So, maybe if they go down that road, and once again, just hypothetical, this could be a year where maybe it's justified to keep 3 quarterbacks on the 53-man roster, given Daniel's coming off the torn ACL. If you were to draft somebody that you can't afford to move to the practice squad and you have a polished vet, by default, you'd have to keep 3 quarterbacks, in my opinion.
100%. I mean, we saw this past season with the number of injuries to the quarterback position across the entire NFL. I believe it was either the most or the
volume was high,
or the second most different starting quarterbacks around the league in the last however many years, a very long time. So I think we're going to see more and more teams across the league carry 3 quarterbacks for that exact reason. And in terms of the Giants specifically, I mean, as we discussed, we don't know if Daniel Jones is going to be ready for week 1. And let's say he's not, and they do draft a quarterback, whether it's day 1, day 2, you don't want to throw that quarterback into the fire week 1. You want to let him get some time to develop, let him learn, watch the NFL from the sideline, see the speed of the game, because it's very different than college football. So that is why what I said before with a veteran in free agency and potentially a rookie in the draft, it's for that exact reason, because I don't think there's any situation in which the Giants want to throw a rookie quarterback out there in week 1 if Daniel Jones is not ready. If he is ready, then obviously that would not be an issue. But again, by the time they have to make decisions about these veteran quarterbacks in free agency, it's still going to be way too far out from the start of training camp to know if Daniel Jones will be ready.
Even at the draft, you could argue. I mean, how much, Matt, are you going to learn from the start of free agency is March 11th to when the draft is at the end of April? I mean, you're talking about just under 2 months. But, I mean, there's only so much you can learn without guys getting on the field and really seeing what they can do. And remember, everybody recovers from a torn ACL very differently. And what makes Daniel unique, Matt, is the fact that he uses his legs.
Yep.
He's not a quarterback that is just going to be a pocket passer. So if you limit him because he doesn't have his legs, that changes who he is as a signal caller and also changes what you can do within the confines of your offense.
Oh, it changes things drastically. So, again, we're not going to really have a great sense of where Daniel Jones is in his rehab even by the time of the draft. Obviously, the time of the draft, I believe it'll be 5 months, 6 months from Daniel Jones' surgery. So I do think that, the trainers inside the building here will be able to give Joe, Brian Dable, everyone, the decision makers, what they believe would be a realistic timeline. But again, we never know. I mean, we just saw last year Kyler Murray took about, I think it was 10 months to get back on the field.
Yeah, I mean, remember, he didn't come into play until after the Cardinals' bye.
Yeah,
which they didn't bring him in immediately.
Exactly. And a reason for that definitely was that was part of the plan for the Cardinals. They were in no, dire rush or even need to bring him back because they knew what type of season they were likely, heading into.
And he got hurt later in the season too, compared to Daniel.
Yeah, so slightly different situation there, but the Giants have to prepare for at least the possibility that Daniel Jones might have to start the season on the PUP list. Like, they don't know that. Obviously, they don't want that to happen. And there have been no reports saying that it could, but they have to prepare for the absolute worst case scenario just in case it does happen. So they're not left trying to like shuffle things around at the last second, trying to put together a quarterback plan. There's at least a chance that he would have to start the season on the PUP list. And if that happens, then you want to have, at least 2 other quarterbacks, if not 3 quarterbacks at that time, to get you through the first chunk of the season.
Plus, God forbid, he has a setback too. Yeah. You have to prepare yourself. I mean, once again, you're not hoping for these things, but that's why you prepare for these things in the offseason. The worst case scenarios, the coulda, woulda, shoulda games, you don't want to have to play that in your head. And I would agree with you, Matt. I think if for some reason Daniel's not ready to go, it's more of a reason why the value of having a proven veteran on the roster increases and skyrockets. Because you want to feel as if somebody's in place to run your offense week 1, and there's not questions about the growing pains, developing as a quarterback simultaneously to knowing the offense. That's more of a reason why it would be surprising if they don't pursue some of these names that we threw out. I mean, granted, you're not going after a Kirk Cousins.
No.
Okay? Ryan Tannehill, I don't know what Tannehill is looking for at this stage in his career. That's why I think Tyrod Taylor, Mitchell Trubisky, Jacoby Brissett. I think that layer of quarterbacks is realistic that they could pursue, and they could very well get a deal done. I mean, I have the list in front of me in terms of the other quarterbacks. I think beyond that, Matt, and you can see the list here, and I'll eliminate Baker and Kirk Cousins to me are in the same boat. Baker's either going to re-sign with Tampa or somebody's going to give him a starting job.
Yeah.
He's not going elsewhere, not after the season he had, to be a backup. Then you got the Gardner Minshews. And Minshew, to me, I'll put Minshew in with Taylor, Trubisky, and Brissett. But Drew Lock, Sam Darnold, Marcus Mariota, that's who you're looking for after you get through that second layer that I just threw out. And then, I mean, Joe Flacco's out there too. But I think age and mobility are 2 things that the Giants have to take into consideration. And Brissett, Trubisky, I mean, Taylor's a little bit more on the older side, but Taylor knows your offense.
Yep.
So there's always appeal.
That's a big plus.
Trubisky is just under 30. Brissett is in that 31-year-old ballpark. So I think both of those would be reasonable choices, and you can use your quarterback's legs to operate the offense. That, to me, is what makes both of them appealing.
And you got to remember, there most likely will be one more addition to that list at some point in the next few weeks.
In terms of somebody getting let go? Sure.
Well, I'm talking specifically Russell Wilson, which I don't know if that would be the type of quarterback the Giants would be looking for in particular, but it's just another veteran quarterback added to that list that you just went through.
Sure.
Because there will be a lot of teams out there trying to solidify their backup quarterback position. A lot of these guys are going to fill those spots. So the more options there are out there, hopefully that drives down the price on these guys, which in turn could help the Giants if one of these guys is the route they plan on going to get their backup quarterback.
Well, Russ is interesting. I think Russ, if you ask him, he wants to still have a legitimate shot to compete to be a starter.
Yeah.
So I would think if another opportunity opens up, because remember, Daniel Jones is in the equation here. Anyone who signs, Matt, with the Giants is understanding I may start a game or 2 if he's not ready to go, but I'm not getting the job long term or even short term. So once again, this is just my personal opinion. If I'm Russell Wilson, I don't know if he's at the point in his career where he's saying, I'm giving up hope that I could go to a place and maybe reestablish myself as a starter. Brissett, he's been a journeyman. Trubisky, journeyman. We know Tyrod Taylor is a great locker room guy, and he's been here. That's the type of player that I think you can sell a veteran on coming in and being an insurance policy. Anyone who is pursuing still being the guy, I don't know if this would be a wise decision for them. Because then when the reality sets in and they're like, well, the opportunity I thought I was going to get doesn't come to fruition, I'm not saying that they're going to be disruptive to the locker room, but to me it's just not as appealing, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just brought Russ up more to add another name to the list. And,
sure.
I see Russ more with a team, maybe like the Steelers, where, as you said, he could have a chance to actually compete for the starting job. And if that were to happen, that would just eliminate the Steelers from all these other as an option for these other quarterbacks.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, granted, they have Kenny Pickett, so, it makes sense for them to bring in a veteran. I'd be surprised, though, if they make a big splash given also their cap situation and some of the other guys that they need to take care of, specifically on the defensive side of the ball. All right, let's reopen up the phone lines here as we move forward, and we check in with Scott in New Mexico. Scott, welcome aboard. What do you got for us?
Hi, guys. How you doing today?
Doing all right.
Good. How are you?
I just found out I missed the first few moments of the show. You may have mentioned it, but I just found out that Marvin Harrison, Caleb Williams, and Jaden Daniels will not compete in the Combine.
And we did talk about that. Yep.
Okay, great. I don't know if you talked about that aspect of how it affects the dynamic of how coaches perceive that. Will they still maintain their levels? And you may have discussed it already, so I don't want. If you did, I'll listen later. But I was just curious, how do people perceive it, the coaches and the general managers, when players don't compete in the Combine?
Well, to answer your question, we did. So we'll give you the abridged version so that we don't repeat ourselves. But the gist of it is, I think most GMs and coaches know that a good percentage of the players are going to pass on the opportunity to throw because they're not with their normal wide receivers and teammates. And both of these guys have already committed to working out at their pro day. So the GMs and the coaches know if they're present at the pro day, they're going to be able to see these guys throw up close and personal. So personally, I don't think it downgrades these individuals at all.
And just in terms of Marvin Harrison, I mean, he was the number one receiver in the country the last 2 seasons.
Right.
Yeah.
And there was an interesting article today Albert Breer put out that pretty much talked about Marvin Harrison's reasoning for not performing at the Combine, but also that, we hear all the time that guys going into the off season before their rookie year, they're training for the Combine, and that's different training than what you would do in a normal NFL off season. Marvin Harrison, since he's pretty much solidified as the number one receiver, is basically jumping into the training in the off season for the NFL as opposed to training for the Combine, which is only going to benefit him as a rookie.
Right. Okay. I'll listen to the early part later just to get your perspectives on what you said earlier. But I have a question for you now on some players that have been linked to the Giants. I've looked at a couple of different sites. First of all, I just want to make a comment on Mitch Trubisky. His passer rating in his last 2 years at Pittsburgh were 58 and 34.6. So I would stay away from him completely.
Sure. No, he definitely has struggled. There's no doubt about that. But, once again, different offense, different scheme.
Sure.
We've seen guys regroup. Yeah.
But I want to talk about these players. These are players that have been linked to the Giants through free agency, and I wanted to get your opinions of basically all of it. They are looking at a quarterback, according to 2 sites, and that's Bo Nix later in the draft. But they are also looking at Jonah Jackson, the guard from Detroit, Gabe Davis, the wide receiver from Buffalo, and Zach Moss in case Saquon Barkley should decide to go elsewhere. I wanted to get your opinion on those players because I know Brian Daboll had experience with Gabe Davis at Buffalo.
So he had Zach Moss experience too. Zach Moss was in Buffalo as well.
Yeah, I think he's with the Colts now, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Right. So, and Bo Nix was the interesting one to me because that's a quarterback that can develop while Daniel Jones is there, or potentially, depending upon the training goes, could be this potential starter if they can't get a good backup. But those are things that will be worked out. But I wanted to get your impression of those players and how that, if they are actually looking at those players and can sign them, how it will change the way the Giants will draft. So basically, Gabe Davis, Jonah Jackson, Bo Nix, and Zach Moss. And I'll be glad to take your answers off the air, guys.
All right, and I appreciate the phone call, Scott. Well, I'm not surprised to hear Buffalo names, right, Matt? I mean,
of course.
Think about how many Buffalo players have already arrived with respect to the Giants. Gabe Davis has dealt with some injuries, but was a solid wide receiver. I mean, he had one breakout year, the year that the Bills played the Chiefs in that game that went to overtime, so 2021. He had a fantastic season. Numbers dipped a little bit, and part of that, I think, of course, was due to injuries. If you bring in somebody like Gabe Davis, I don't think that should present reasoning to not still draft a playmaker at number 6 overall, because you don't look at Gabe Davis as not a speedster, okay? He's not a guy that's going to take the top off the ball. he's more of, and this is not disrespectful, but he's a possession guy. He can average good yardage per reception, but he's not Neighbors, okay? And he's not Odunze. So I think those guys are different in terms of their skill set. So I really don't think that would drastically change their thinking. Jonah Jackson is an excellent guard for the Detroit Lions. He has been a staple of that offensive line. And I was checking, he made the Pro Bowl in 2021, dealt with some injuries later this season. But, I mean, to me, Jackson's going to cost some money.
Yeah.
I mean, the Lions, they're going to have to cough up some bucks, and if he goes elsewhere, it's probably going to be because he has some competition. So, I mean, even if realistically they do have interest in him, that is going to be a costly guard. Jonah's not one of these, Matt, journeyman guards, that you ranked for a year or two. Jonah was a third-round pick in 2020. He's coming off his rookie deal. He's looking to get paid, okay? So this is his first opportunity to hit free agency. I had an opportunity. I've had him on my Sirius show multiple times. Really good personality, nice guy, but he's going to be a costly guard if the Lions don't re-sign him. So I don't know from a financial perspective if that's a realistic target for the Giants.
Yeah, well, just going back to what the caller said, just wanted to clarify one thing, because he mentioned a bunch of guys that are going to be free agents, and then he mentioned Bo Nix, who is obviously in the draft. So Bo Nix just has to be, separated from the other group of guys that he discussed. But about Jonah Jackson, he's very solid guard, and I think we all expect the Giants to be, looking for 1, 2, who knows how many interior linemen, whether it's through free agency or the draft. I will say the one thing that might drive Jonah Jackson's price down a little bit is the fact that there are at least several other guards that are about to hit free agency that a lot of, media outlets out there have ranked higher than Jonah Jackson. I'm blanking on the guy from the Patriots.
I'm bringing up the list right now.
The guy on the Patriots who's tackle/guard, who's potentially the number one offensive lineman in free agency this offseason. I'm blanking on his name.
You're talking about
Michael...
A guy that is at tackle, you're talking about?
A tackle guard. He's played both. That's why
I'm looking at my list. I don't even see a Trent Brown. Is that
I'm thinking Michael O. Something from the Patriots.
No, I know, because I'm not seeing him on the free agent list. That's why I'm surprised.
I don't know if you were looking at guard.
On Wenu.
Yeah.
You're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
no, because I looked at guard. They don't have him on this site.
Because he played tackle, I believe, for the Patriots this past season, but he has previous experience at guard, so a lot of teams could look at him as either a tackle or a guard, which, for the Giants in particular, they could be interested in that, obviously, because they have Evan Neal at right tackle right now. Who knows if he's going to stay there, if they might try moving him in, bringing Onuanu, or I apologize for mispronouncing that.
They just, I'm looking, Matt, through the list here, and this is Spotrac. I'm not seeing him. And I've looked through the guard and the tackle spot. I'm not saying that you're giving out wrong information, but I'm stunned. They don't even have him.
Yeah, that's odd, because a lot of places have him considered like the highest offensive lineman about to hit free agency.
Yeah.
But regardless, Kevin Dotson, Kevin Zeitler, there are other guards out there that, same level, if not even a little better than Jonah Jackson, that I think could just drive Jonah Jackson's price down a little bit.
I don't mean to.
And by better, I mean it depends. It's obviously in the eye of the beholder, but
sure. Well, but the one thing that makes Jackson appealing is he's 27. Okay, and once again, coming off the rookie contract, a number of the names you brought up, keep in mind, veterans that are in that 30 ballpark. So my point is, if you want to invest in a guard and you're not looking for a one-year rental, Jackson's appealing, Matt, from that standpoint.
That's fair.
Because Zeitler had a great season, I should say, with Baltimore, but, I mean, Zeitler's 34. Yeah. Jackson's 27. So I think if you had the two, who do you want to invest in long-term? To me, it's a no-brainer. It's Jackson versus Zeitler. That's the only difference that I wanted to
totally fair. But you also have guys like Robert Hunt, Kevin Dotson. Those guys are both 27. So they're in the same ballpark as Jonah Jackson. And at least according to Pro Football Focus, PFF has Jonah Jackson as on their top 200 free agent list at number 94. Which seems a little further down than I would think.
I'd be curious, though, do you know how many, off the top of your head, how many guards are ahead of him? Because remember, out of the 99, there may not be a lot of guards in that group.
For sure. Yeah. I'm just going down the list, which is not separated by position, but I do see Robert Hunt is 27, Kevin Dotson is 23, Kevin Zeitler is somewhere here, but above Jonah Jackson in 94. So there are at least some veteran free agents out there that are ranked. Teams will probably have higher on their free agent boards than Jonah Jackson. But you bring up a very good point about his age. Obviously for a team like the Giants who are looking to build an offensive line not only for 2024 but beyond for the years to come.
Sure.
Investing in one of the younger free agent guards, that could definitely be something that the Giants have pretty high up on their priority list. I would not be surprised if that is the case, at least.
Well, no, it's interesting to see Pro Football Focus's list, because my question with Pro Football Focus is, do they take, Matt, that into consideration? When they rank the players, are they looking at age and how teams view players based on age? I always wonder that, because remember, if Zeitler is very high on the rankings, and rightfully so, but Zeitler, to me, if you're weighing him for a long-term deal, is not nearly as appealing as Robert Hunt and Jonah Jackson.
Yeah,
because of the age factor.
I think they rank it just based off the 2024 season.
And that's what I'm thinking.
Which is Zeitler is ranked 32 on the list.
Which is understandable because he had a really good year.
Yeah. But that's a fair point.
But they're not looking at it, when you rank free agents, if you had the board of teams, they're looking at age. They're looking at coming off a rookie contract. They're factoring those things in as opposed to on an island how they performed in 2023.
Yeah, 100%.
Just, once again, you got to take all of that into consideration. I'm not saying that you're not thinking about that, but when we have these lists and, fans look at these lists, they're like, oh, well, PFF had him as 99, so he must have been a garbage offensive lineman. Well, let's not go that far. They're not looking at why he is appealing from a financial standpoint.
Yeah, true. And there's one other guard that personal favorite of mine, Dalton Reisner,
who did not sign until very later in the season.
Yeah, he signed after the season was already underway, so played less last year, has a little bit less, tread on the tires.
Sure.
28 years old, just could be another guy that Giants maybe have some interest in.
Well, I like your thinking, Matt. I think from a financial standpoint, Reisner may be more in the ballpark financially for the Giants than Jackson, where you get the best of both worlds, age and somebody that doesn't have as much wear and tear on the body.
Yeah.
So that is a good name to at least take into consideration. All right, let's head back to the phone lines. Let's check in with Lou in Florida. Lou, welcome aboard. What do you got for us?
Yeah, hi, Lance. Hi, Matt. I'd like you both to bear with me. I'm going to try to put my GM's hat on, and I'd like you both to put your GM's hat on as what I view what would be an ideal off-season for the Giants. First, I'll address free agency, then I'll get to the first 4 rounds in the draft, and I'll leave it with you guys. My number one priority during the off-season is I'd love them to sign Saquon to a 3-year deal, 2-year guarantee. He's a weapon. I'd love to have him back. He's such a great Giant. Number 2, from a free agency perspective, love to sign a plug-and-play right guard. I know you just heavily discussed the potential guard position and who's available. Number 3, the backup quarterback position. Taylor, Brissett, Minshew, you all mentioned. I don't want Trubisky. I really don't want him anywhere near New Jersey, quite honestly. As it relates to the draft, the first round, if either Neighbors, who would be my preference, or Odunze is on the board, I think the Giants need to take a weapon in the first round. They're so good. I'm in SEC territory, and I got to see Neighbors too often as a Gator fan. But in the second round, our first second round pick, I would love them to select a stud defensive tackle to get into the mix with Dexter and some of the other young guys that we drafted over the last couple of years, as well as Nacho. With the second pick of the second round, I would really love to get an offensive guard to put on the left side and just develop or at least compete for the left guard position with, both Pakithan and Azudu. That would be great. Third round, a cornerback, and I also have running back because we're not sure how healthy, Saquon will be. I know Eric Gray is a really good running back, but maybe a little bit more depth there, but a cornerback also, if available. And lastly, in the fourth round, if he's available, I would like to see the Giants maybe put out a little flyer on Spencer Rattler, the quarterback for the University of South Carolina. What are your thoughts?
All right, Lou. Well, we'll let you go on that note and appreciate the phone call. I mean, first of all, let me just preface the comments. When you assign positions to a round, you're assuming that the Giants think highly of that position. So it's dangerous to think that way, Matt. You know, when you say you want a defensive tackle in the second round, well, what if they don't like any defensive tackles? Or what if nobody warrants at that position a second-round pick? So I understand you get caught up in positions and players, but it's so early, and without knowing the board, I would not get caught up in a specific position if it doesn't match up value-wise with where they're selecting. As far as free agency, which I think is a more practical discussion, Matt, you know, we talked about the backup quarterback. I think that's a big priority. I'd put that right near the top of the list in them needing to bring in a seasoned, polished veteran. So no disagreement there. I mean, Saquon was their best offensive weapon. So you want to do everything you can from a financial standpoint, what's reasonable, to see if you can bring him back. But you also need to, remember, protect yourself because Saquon hasn't stayed fully healthy during his tenure. Yep. So, you know, it's very similar to the Daniel Jones conversation, and I think we already addressed the guards. I mean, just based on who's set to be a free agent, the Giants need to address the interior of the offensive line. So all three of those areas, I think, are reasonable targets in free agency. Yeah, and I'll take it a little one step further in that even the position groups that he mentioned for possible draft picks, while I agree with you, you can't kind of assign around, those pretty much all together, those are pretty much the positions that the Giants are most likely going to address throughout this offseason. You know, some of the positions that was mentioned that the caller said could be addressed in the draft, could be addressed in free agency and vice versa. But I do expect the Giants to add players at all of those positions that he did mention. The one that I don't believe he mentioned that is I think a big one as well is cornerback. Adoree Jackson, who's been the team's number one corner of the last couple seasons, is going to be a free agent. Maybe they bring him back, who knows? But they have Deonte Banks, but other than Deonte Banks, you don't really have a second outside corner that's right now on the roster that you'd feel comfortable putting out there and starting week one. I will say that there is a pretty deep class of veteran free agent cornerbacks that should be available this offseason. Personal opinion, I think that's probably the most likely direction they go to address the position. Because Deonte Banks obviously will be the number one corner. He pretty much was matching up against the number one receiver every game right off the bat as a rookie. So year two, I expect him to do the same. He also didn't mention safety. Xavier McKinney is a free agent. There have been, rumblings out there that the Giants could potentially maybe put one of the two tags on McKinney. Transition tag wouldn't even ensure that he stays here. That just pretty much gives the Giants the right to match any offer he gets, but they don't get any compensation if he were to leave. And if he were to sign with another team, then safety becomes another position of need that the Giants would have to address this offseason. Well, they got Pinnock, they got Belton, and then it depends on how they feel about Javarius Owens, who, remember, they drafted, didn't see the field much at all, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But yeah, if McKinney was to leave, you could maybe even bring in a veteran safety. You don't even have to draft a guy. You could sign a guy to a one-year deal, Matt, and be a bit of a placeholder. But corner, to me, a veteran corner is a bigger priority than a veteran safety, I think, as the roster stands right now, because, as you mentioned, if Adoree doesn't return, you don't have much experience at that position. You've got Banks, you got Flott, and he's dealt with some injuries, and Darnay Holmes is a free agent. So you can't even pencil or pen him into the equation. So, and Trey Hawkins, remember, had a good camp, but that didn't translate over to the regular season. So I'm with you. Veteran corner to address in free agency, I think would be practical.
Because, again, there's a deep class of veteran corners that shouldn't cost the Giants or any team, too much money.
Sure.
That can step in and immediately be a very solid starter across from Deonte Banks.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's why I think the way we were talking about it is a little bit more sensible in terms of you want to target those positions, but you can't assign it around because you're assuming that the Giants value players available in that round. And they may not. They may have the next best defensive tackle as a third-round pick or a fourth-round pick. You want to take him in the second round? doesn't necessarily add up that way.
I think the only round you can even somewhat do that for is just the first round, and that's only because the Giants are picking all the way up at number 6, so we have a pretty good sense of the group of players that will be available. But yeah, once you get past the first round, you really cannot assign a position to a specific round because we have no idea what the Giants draft board could look like. They could have a guy that, guard all the way up at, 12 on their board that's sitting there in the early second round because teams tend to not take interior offense linemen in the first round. So yeah, beyond the first round, you really cannot put positions into specific rounds.
Well, and also they could address one of the positions that you assigned a round to in free agency.
100%.
And then maybe the urgency to take a player in that spot is not where it is. Now, I'm a big believer you're not drafting for 2024. You're drafting for years to come. Yeah. So I'm not turned off by duplication, but if you go in free agency, you spend some money, you sign a guy to a 2 or 3 year deal, does that maybe change your thinking about taking a player that high in the draft? Sure. Absolutely. Can't be naive from that standpoint. So that's why we got to get through the domino known as free agency before we start penciling in specific positions and players. But
very big domino.
Without a doubt. But I think we're all in the same ballpark in terms of needs, at least.
Yeah.
Free agency and the draft. All right. Well, that is going to wrap up Monday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. Rest of the week, we'll have shows live from the Combine, same time, 12:30 to 1:30 p.m. Eastern from Tuesday through Friday, and then we'll be back up and running again here in our studio next Monday. We appreciate everybody for tuning in. Today's episode, Big Blue Kickoff Live, part of the Giants platforms everywhere, and Giants.com/podcasts. For Matt Sitek, I'm Lance Meadow saying so long here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Stay locked to Giants.com for all the latest, and we'll speak to you Tuesday right here on BBKL. Have a good one.
Introducing the Lisa Chill Collection, your answer to hot nights. These mattresses beat the heat with ultra-cool covers, whisking away heat for the perfect sleep temperature. Save up to $460 on Chill mattresses and get 2 free pillows when you shop now. iHeart listeners can save an extra $50 off by visiting lisa.com/iHeart. That's LEESA.com/iHeart. Exclusions apply. See lisa.com for more details.
You deserve to treat yourself, so turn your tax refund into a U fund and give yourself a Straight Talk Wireless Extended Silver Unlimited plan and get a new Samsung Galaxy A14 on them. You can get a great everyday value on wireless with Straight Talk's Unlimited plan starting at $25 a line per month for 4 lines. You'll save so much you'll be enjoying that refund all year long. It's the refund that keeps on refunding. Find Straight Talk at straighttalk.com or at your local Walmart store. Taxes and fees not included. Offer valid through 4/14/24 while supplies last. Online only. Must purchase a Straight Talk Extended Silver Unlimited plan to qualify. Limit of 5 phones per customer. Family plan discount with 4 lines, all on the Silver Unlimited plan. Not combinable with autopay discount.